the Americans' decision to bomb Iran, sir? You agree with Trump's decision?
That's Prime Minister Mark Carney this morning leaving for the NATO summit, not answering questions from reporters about yesterday's U.S. attack on Iran as he heads, as I said, to Europe. He's got a pair of summits there focused on strengthening global defense and security. Tomorrow, Canada is expected to sign on to a new defense partnership with the European Union in what officials say will be one of the most wide-ranging agreements the EU has ever reached. Then on Tuesday, world leaders will gather at The Hague for the annual NATO summit. Overshadowing that will no doubt, of course, be last night's U.S. attack on Iran and the major escalation now of the conflict in the region. Most recent figures show that Canada is spending less than 1.5% of GDP on defense. But earlier this month, Ottawa says it will now spend billions more so it can meet that 2% NATO spending target by next March. But allies are now talking about whether to move toward an even higher benchmark of 5% of GDP. Anders Fogh Rasmussen is the former Secretary General of NATO, and he joins me from Brussels. Nice to see you again.
You're welcome.
I want to start with a development in this country that obviously impacts NATO, and that is the government's announcement that it will reach now that 2% of GDP on military spending. How significant is that Canada is finally, some might say, going to reach that target?
That is, of course, significant because one of the problems within NATO has been a very low Canadian contribution to the alliance. So I really appreciate this announcement. It sets a good example for other members of NATO.
Of course, it's happening as there's a conversation happening about increasing the target. On the one hand, some people suggesting 5%, others 3.5%. What do you think would make sense in terms of a contribution going forward?
Well, one thing is the target. I fully support a target of 3.5% when it comes to core defense plus 1.5% in related defense investment. So all in all, a new target of 5% to replace the current target of 2%. But as important is the timeline. And there are rumors that some countries will try to dilute the new target by proposing a very lengthy timeline. 2035 have been suggested, 2032. That's unambitious in my opinion. The fact is Putin is bombing Ukraine right now. And according to our intelligence services, Putin will be able to attack a NATO country by the end of this decade. So in my opinion, we should decide to invest at least 5% of GDP, as suggested, but we should reach that target before 2030.
There are some nations, as you know, already balking at that. Spain is not in favor of that. It would be challenging for Canada to get there too. Are you concerned that this conversation around the percentage and the timeline might derail the summit when many people believe that it's very important that there be a show of unity out of the NATO summit this coming week?
Well, I think at the end of the day, we will see a unity as always in the past history of NATO. But I hope that kind of unity and cohesion will not take place at the expense of an ambitious timeline and an ambitious defense target. But here and now, unity and cohesion is a very important issue in itself. And I hope the summit, that will be a very short summit with a very focused communique that will demonstrate unity and cohesion.
How important is it to hear President Trump at this very short summit, which was made short in part for him, demonstrate support for Ukraine and a willingness to continue to support Ukraine militarily and financially?
It is, of course, important because the only way to force Putin to engage in a serious peace negotiation process is to strengthen the hand of the Ukrainians. And that's why we need to deliver everything the Ukrainians need to push back the Russians. They need military assistance. We should arm them to the teeth. They need financial assistance. And obviously, it would be important that Trump and the United States demonstrate a willingness to put more pressure on Putin by delivering all kinds of assistance to Ukraine. But I would add to this, even in the case that the U.S. withdraws from assisting Ukraine, we Europeans and also Canada will have to step up to the plate and replace the lacking American capacities.
One of the things Canada plans to do next week beyond the summit is to also join the Rearm Europe initiative in terms of creating this new sort of defense alliance with Europe. I wonder what you think of that as a former Secretary General of NATO, whether you are concerned that that is in any way undermining NATO or, replacing NATO. What do you make of this Rearm Europe and the fact that Canada is getting directly involved?
I'm very encouraged by that step because it plays into the picture of strong cohesion within the NATO alliance. Actually, I do believe that our response to the aggressive behavior from the Americans should be to create what I call a D7. A D7 consisting of the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea. Mm-hmm. Together, we represent 30 to 40% of the world economy. We could help each other if we are exposed to pressure from either China or the US. Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate this rapprochement between Canada and the European Union.
Okay. Former NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen, nice to see you again, sir. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you for having me.
World leaders will gather at The Hague for the annual NATO summit this week. Overshadowing it, no doubt, will be the last night's U.S. attack on Iran and that escalation, would seem, of the conflict between Israel and Iran. On the official agenda, though, is that increase to defense spending, Canada promising to spend billions more in military spending. Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Rob Russo is the Canada correspondent for The Economist, former CBC Parliamentary Bureau Chief, Catherine Lévesque, a parliamentary reporter for The National Post, and Emilie, Nicolas, a columnist for Le Devoir. Good to see you all. So, Emilie, I'll start with you. I wonder how what has unfolded over the past 12 hours will affect that conversation, that NATO conversation, or even the summit that Mark Carney's going to rearm Europe. One of the people I spoke to in the last hour suggested, hey, it could actually help Donald Trump's case to try and tell people they have to increase military spending.
It could definitely, from a political standpoint, help world leaders get some sort of consensus on this. At the same time, I don't think that from just general population standpoint, anybody's reassured by what's been happening over the last, not only hours, but only the last couple of days. Mm-hmm. And that having to rearm ourselves isn't something that makes people feel safe. This is only something that's coming out of a sense of danger. And so we also need to realize that I understand that the ratio for the GDP might not be exactly the same as they were, for example, during the Cold War, but that there is also a scenario brewing where if people are feeling like services for themselves directly are not met, or that there is some sort of a lack of care or housing situation that is hard, sure, while there is money spent on the military. This is a situation where you have a lot of social tensions, the way you had in the U.S. for decades as well. And so, I'm not saying this is where we're heading now. I'm just saying that it's something that worries a lot of us, not just in Canada but around the world, and that it might look like something that's reassuring right now, but actually it is really very worrisome on the mid and long term that we have to this race to arm, generally speaking, in geopolitics.
Those are all very good concerns. Rob, I do think, though, that it does sort of, it at least gives the Prime Minister something to point to, right? What has happened lately to try and justify why further spending is needed.
Yeah, as John Manley said, with no small of contempt for what Canada had been doing in terms of spending, we can no longer, and we are no longer getting up to excuse ourselves to wash our hands in the bathroom when the bill comes. We're now paying the bill. It's interesting. I spoke to former CDS Wayne Eyre, who said that the spending we're doing is going to change the nature of what kind of military Canada does have. Canada's traditionally been an expeditionary force. Since the Boer War, we sent soldiers overseas for foreign wars. The spending, the current spending and where it's probably going is going to be in our own backyard. And if it's done right, in consultation with the Inuit in particular, we might actually finally get to that dual use facilities, ports, roads that actually help our Indigenous people in our country at the same time. We have a sorry history with that. We didn't do it right during the Cold War, certainly during the 1950s, but there's a chance to do it there. And there's a chance for Canada to do something in its own backyard. And we need to do something in our own backyard because it's now the backyard that is between China, Russia, and the United States. So there's an imperative here, an opportunity here as well, as opposed to the Europeans. Poland's already blown past 5%. Germany and France are going to 5%, without a doubt. UK is probably going to get there. We're going to have to take our time. We don't even know how we're going to spend the 2% now or where the money's going to come from. We don't know. But we have to do it, and we're doing it in our own backyard, and it's going to change the nature of Canadian Armed Forces.
The money's there. We don't know where it's come from. I guess we'll figure that out in the fall when we see a budget. Catherine, how do you expect this will unfold now that Canada has at least promised to meet this 2%?
I mean, certainly the starting point is a lot better. At least we can point to something and say, hey, you know what, in this next fiscal year, we are going to get to 2%, which is, vastly different from the summit last year where Justin Trudeau ultimately said, we'll get to 2% in 2032. So the situation has completely changed in the last year. But coming into the summit, obviously, yes, we'll get to 2%, but it won't be enough in the coming years. The negotiation is obviously to that 5%. And I think, we'll really have to get into the nitty-gritty of what that actually means because, as one of your previous guests said, we're talking about 3.5% in actual defense spending, but 1.5% in defense-related infrastructure. And some government officials were actually saying yesterday that Canada is actually, on track to meet that 1.5%. So, the big question is now, can we actually get to that 3.5%? Would it be in 7, in 10 years? I think it will be very steep because, already we're spending a lot of money. I think in the next year, we talked about increases for the Canadian Armed Forces. I think Prime Minister Mark Carney has tried to put some more predictable spending, but certainly there will be a lot of questions as to where this money is going to be coming from and where it will be going in the next decade.
Emilie, last minute to you.
There will indeed be questions, and I will just say that in terms of defense and protecting the Canadian territory, it will be easier to get broader political support than if we are being dragged into a global conflict, for example, with Iran, and the U.S. is an ally there. That's going to brew some really intense and understandable division among the Canadian population. And so if it's about national defense, I think this is where most Canadians are starting from in terms of their interest in raising the military budget.
Okay, forgive me for not having more time. Lots of news today. I didn't expect it all. So Rob Russo, Catherine Lévesque, Emilie, Nicolas, thank you all very much. We'll see you soon. Thank you.
Take care.